Hi, my name's Lydia Kokkola, and I want to talk about a way of taking notes that may help you in your studies. I don't promise that it will help you the first time, the second time, or even the third time that you try to do this, but it is something that has really helped me over the years. And since I've started guiding students to work in the same way, I've noticed that the quality of their writing has improved, their levels of stress have gone down, and there has been less plagiarism. So what is smart note writing? Well, basically, it's a form of writing that you do whilst you are reading. It's very tempting when you've got a big project to do, like a big essay or even perhaps a whole dissertation or a thesis. If you're writing a large, lengthy text, it's very easy to think, oh, I don't know anything about this subject, and then go away and read and get lost in your text, and therefore not really engage with the material that you're reading as well as you could. If you stop and write whilst you're reading, it's more effective. So when you're reading, you can make the most of the points that grab your attention. I think most of us, when we're reading information text, we're used to looking for what is the most salient, so the most visible point of that makes sense to me in this text. What is important about this text that is making me want to continue reading it? So when you're reading and something grabs your attention, it is really sensible to interrupt your reading in order to write at the same time. So that's a really smart thing to do. I'm talking about when you're reading, but this same thing applies if you are handling data. It doesn't actually matter at all what kind of data it is, whether it's interview data, whether it's reading fiction, whether it's looking at the television, whether it's linguistic data, whether it's experimental data. It doesn't matter what kind of data you're working with. Every now and then, whilst you're working, something will jump out at you and you will be interested in it. And then interrupting to write about that is smart. Because writing is a tool for thinking. And if you write down what you are thinking as you read, then you'll waste less time reading irrelevant material. You'll be able to find the more useful stuff. You'll be able to think more clearly about what is the relevance of the text or the particular data for your work, for your text, for your thesis, for your essay. And you start to understand your own argument more clearly. You can understand your voice more clearly. So my advice is that you never read more than 2 research articles or 2 book chapters without stopping to write, to think, well, how important is this to me? And that also helps. The same idea applies when you're looking at your data. So it doesn't matter what your data is, take a small chunk of it. Obviously, what that chunk will depend on what kind of data you're working with, and stop every now and then to write a smart note. So what it is, this smart note, it might be first step to point out what it isn't. It is not an incomplete sentence. It isn't a quotation or a paraphrase, although it's likely to contain both. And it's not neutral. It is designed precisely to fit the paper or the essay or the thesis that you are trying to write. Right. It is a paragraph, and our paragraph is at least 3 sentences, otherwise it's not a paragraph. The first sentence will introduce the idea. So what was the context in which this idea appeared? Then it will have this reference to the thing that you've been reading or to your data. And that will be probably the middle sentence. And then at very least, last sentence will be something to tell us why that's important. But it's not checked for perfect grammar, but it is expressed in as formal language as you can possibly manage, so that you try to get into that academic tone of expression all the way through. I strongly advise you to quote a lot rather than paraphrasing, because this will help you avoid plagiarizing, including unconscious plagiarism. Now, a lot of students do a terrible thing of copy-pasting large chunks of text into their own documents. So text that they've taken from publications, especially now when they're digital publications. They put them straight into the text, and then they so-called work with them. And what that is a sophisticated form of plagiarism, basically. That is not actually creating your own ideas. So if it's going to be there, actually leave it there as quoted information. Don't work with it to try and just change a few words here and there. That is not expressing the ideas in your own voice. That is plagiarism. But once you've got these quotations, a good rule of thumb is that your discussion of the quotation should be at least as long as the quotation, ideally 2 to 3 times as long. So if you just kind of look at it in terms of the length, that kind of it helps. So here's an example. So here's a paragraph taken from Trask. And in it, he says, the grammar of any language is articulated in terms of a sizable number of classes of items and forms, the categories of grammar. These categories are, moreover, of several different types. Here I only have space to introduce a representative sample of these categories. To begin with, the vocabulary of every language contains many tens of thousands of words. And once again, I mean every language. It is simply not true that some human speech communities make do with a few hundred words supplemented by grunts and gestures. This curious belief, which pops up from time to time, is merely the result of misunderstanding, ignorance, and prejudice. So thank you, Trask, for that. Okay, so what would you do if you're going to take notes on this section? Well, look at these notes here. Grammar is a way of categorizing languages. Yes, that was in there. Vocabulary is one form of categorization. Yes. All languages have large vocabularies. Yes. And then this kind of long phrase, which is way too close to the original. That would be great if you're able to go that fast in taking notes in class. But that last bit is, even with the reference to the page at the end, that is actually plagiarism and very easily becomes plagiarism in your own text. So that is actually not particularly efficient. Great in class. But what's not efficient about that is, what do you think about that? What do you think? Why is this bit of text important to you? Now, obviously, this bit of text isn't important to you, but I'm going to pretend that it is. And the next slide is going to show me doing that. All right. So this is me trying to pretend, what context might I have for writing about this? So I pretended that I wanted to write about African-American vernacular English. And I wanted to see if I could make use of that description of grammar in it. So let's have a look at what I did. And I honestly did just write this straight off without editing it too much. When people argue that African-American vernacular English is an inferior form of English language, their claims typically come down to the ways in which African-American vernacular English breaks the rules of conventional English grammar. Strictly speaking, grammar is simply a way of categorizing language. It is descriptive, not proscriptive. Now, that expression, frankly, I think that's brilliant. I'm really excited that I came up with that fresh phrase. And I didn't know I thought that at all. But as I was writing it, suddenly, oh, this is really pretty and unusual. I'll do that, because I was thinking, oh, it's not describing the language, but actually we're treating it as though it was a law that was imposed on it. And that's what Trask is saying. He's saying it isn't that law. Now, I know that you will just think, oh, yeah, well, that's Lydia. She's been publishing for a long time and she knows what she's doing and so on. That won't happen to me. But I couldn't have got this to this point in any other way than by writing a smart note. If I don't produce these sentences all the time, every now and then something lovely will come up, but I never know when it's going to happen. But it often comes just when I'm very particularly trying to think, what is the important thing in this text that I'm reading? Or what is this important thing in my data? What am I trying to say here? And that often leads to a surprising sentence. And although there is a widespread belief that some blah, blah, and now look, it's properly quoted. So that's no plagiarism, that's properly quoted. I've given the context in which Trask said this. I've highlighted what the important thing is. And then I try to think, right, what could this do for my argument? In this paper, I shall examine Graham's identification of African-American vernacular English verb forms as a descriptive grammar and withhold my judgment of their communicative value until my concluding remarks. Okay, so I just made up the name Graham because I don't actually know enough about verb forms here. But it was just me trying to kind of say, well, okay, I'm not actually going to write about this trash book, and I'm not actually going to write about African American vernacular English. But what I wanted to do there was have a sentence that shows you how at the end of the paragraph, you might try to think, what relevance does this paragraph have to the other things I've written so far? So that's a paragraph. It starts with me trying to sum up where I'm coming from. So I chose to talk about Ave. And then I tried to summarize the sort of the idea that Trask was trying to get across. And I ended up with a lovely sentence about being descriptive rather than prescriptive and that kind of thing. Then I have a quotation, and then I have a bit where I try to say, how does this connect to the rest of what I wanted to say in my essay? So that beginning, setting the context, and then the final sentence, moving away from the quotation. Right, so then I have a whole paragraph, and then I carry on reading till the next bit jumps up, and then I do my next one, and so on. And I carry on doing that until I get to the end of the article or the chapter. And then what do I do? Well, it depends how much I know what I want to write about. Sometimes I just put them under random headings. I try to see if it's like, I know I want to write roughly about this topic, but I actually don't really know what I need to say. So I might do that. Sometimes I already know roughly what I need to say in the article, or I've already come so far in what I'm trying to write that I have a template and I've got all my subheadings. So I know that when I write this paragraph, that's likely to belong under that particular heading. And I just stick it there. Sometimes I find that, hey, I've just written one point of view over here. I've like about following rules or something like that. I've got a particular argument going in one direction, and then over here I'm disagreeing with myself and I've got a completely different opinion with myself, and then I have to really stop and think, well, what do I think? So do I think grammar is descriptive, or do I think it's prescriptive? And actually the answer is I think both, but it depends on the context in which I'm talking about it and what do I mean by grammar. So those moments when I notice that I'm disagreeing with myself are often very, very useful. What else do I do? Sometimes I notice that other people are disagreeing, and then that also makes me stop and think. And that's a point when I can sort of make my voice more visible and more powerful, because I can say, well, on the one hand, Christian is saying this, and on the other hand, Graham is saying that. So what is the right answer, folks? And then I present the right answer, and it makes me sound very knowledgeable. Very often I'll actually find the answer in another SmartNote, so that's a very useful thing to do. But all of this, all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to sit down and think, okay, I'm just trying to connect these two paragraphs. So what's the connection? What's the missing bit in between? I don't have to sit down and think, now I'm going to write my article. All I have to do is to sit down and think, okay, I've got these two paragraphs that are connected in some way, but there's no bridge at the moment. So what do I need to write to get from that paragraph to the next paragraph? And that lowers my anxiety, because even though I've been publishing for 20 odd years, I still get really anxious when I have to face a blank screen. And if I just kind of look at these little SmartNotes, I could just kind of see, okay, so how can I just develop this idea and so on? I just stick within that one paragraph and seeing how can I get from this paragraph to the next paragraph. I don't have to think the whole of the article. All I have to do is think getting from one little tiny bit to the next little bit. But if I realize that, okay, I can't get from this one idea to the other idea, that's also useful, because that tells me exactly what it is I need to read. So I don't need to read masses of stuff. I know exactly what it is I need to read, because I need something that will say, what is the connection between this idea and that idea? So that when I go online to search for new materials, my searching is much, much more effective. And I don't think of any of this as being writing, it's just note taking. And that really makes me less stressful. And if I start to get panicky, then I just go back to note taking. So I hope that helped you sort of get some ideas about how you might want to work with your materials in a slightly different way. And let me know how you get on.